Comrades, I ask you to open your eyes, to see with clarity what has been veiled from you for so long. From the moment you were born into this world, you were thrust into a society whose rules were written not by you, not by those who toil beside you, but by a class that profits from your labor, yet never earns it. There exists a contract, a silent, invisible agreement that binds you to exploitation, that demands your sweat, your effort, your very life, yet asks nothing in return. And herein lies the deception. This contract was never signed by you. You did not consent. You were never asked. Yet it governs every hour of your labor, every beat of your heart, and every thought of what is possible for your life. This contract is capitalism. It is a system whose foundation is the extraction of value from human labor. It cloaks itself in the language of freedom, choice, and opportunity. But these are illusions, seductive lies meant to pacify the oppressed. You are told, you are free, you are independent, you choose your path. But examine the truth. You labor not to fulfill your own potential, but to fill the coffers of a class that owns what you have built. Every product, every service, every innovation, every moment of your effort stolen from you under the guise of wage labor, commodified, monetized, and turned against your own interests. The market does not care for your well-being. It never did. It was never designed to. It exists solely to perpetuate inequality, to sustain the wealth of the few while maintaining the obedience of the many. Ask yourselves, who benefits from this silent contract? Not you, not your families, not the communities that nurture your lives. The benefits flow upward, concentrated in the hands of the capitalists, the owners of land, factories, banks, and intellectual property. They thrive while you endure. They grow fat while you toil. They live in comfort while you struggle to make ends meet. And yet, the greatest trick of all is that you are taught to accept this as natural, inevitable, and righteous. You are told that to question this order is to threaten society itself. This is ideological control. This is domination disguised as morality, consent disguised as necessity. But history is witness. Oppression can never endure forever without resistance. The working class, the proletariat, the great mass of humanity that creates the wealth of society through labor, has the power to dismantle the very foundations of this exploitative system. Your labor is not merely a means of survival, it is the source of all social wealth, the true engine of civilization. Yet under this silent contract that power has been stolen, appropriated, and alienated, the time has come to reclaim it. Understand this, comrades, your suffering is not the result of personal failure. It is structural. It is embedded in the institutions that rule our lives. Your poverty is not a moral defect. Your exhaustion is not an individual weakness. They are consequences of a system that demands your subjugation and rewards the few who govern it. Capitalism thrives by dividing you, by pitting worker against worker, by fostering competition where solidarity must reign. It whispers lies of individual merit, concealing the collective oppression that binds you all. Only through unity, organization, and conscious struggle can you break these chains. The silent contract you never agreed to can be nullified, not through passivity or appeal, but through revolutionary action, by uniting your strength, by recognizing your shared condition, by asserting your collective will. The working class can reclaim what has been taken, reshape society, and dismantle the mechanisms of exploitation. The means are in your hands, the factories, the fields, the offices, the infrastructure, the very machinery of production that sustains the world. If you seize them, if you govern your labor collectively, the wealth of society will serve society itself, not a parasitic elite. Rise, comrades. Speak truth to the illusions that have bound you. Organize where the system has sown division. Demand your rights where they have been denied. Reject the ideology that masks coercion as freedom. Recognize the power you hold in solidarity, the power you wield in consciousness, the power that can topple empires of exploitation. The silent contract can be shattered, for it exists only as long as you accept it. Deny consent. Claim your freedom. Transform society. Build a world where labor serves life, not the accumulation of profit for the few. The moment of recognition is upon you. The chains are visible. The lies are exposed. The contract is silent no longer. You did not agree, yet it binds you. Refuse its power. Organize, rise, reclaim. The revolution is not a distant dream, it is your duty, your right, your inevitable destiny. The future belongs to those who labor, to those who unite, to those who will not be silent under the weight of exploitation. From the moment a human being enters the world under capitalism, they are immediately caught in a web of obligations and constraints that were never chosen, never negotiated, and never agreed upon. This is the silent contract of exploitation, the invisible arrangement by which society demands the labor of the many to enrich the few. It is silent because it is never written, because it is never acknowledged, because its terms are imposed through necessity, coercion, and the structures of power rather than through consent. Yet it governs every hour of life, every exertion of effort, every action that produces value in this society. The worker, born with the capacity to create, to think, to build, is immediately transformed into a commodity, not in name but in effect. Labor becomes an obligation, a currency demanded by a system that pretends to reward merit while systematically extracting wealth from those who produce it. The capitalist does not labor to create value. The capitalist profits from the labor of others. The worker's effort, their energy, their creativity, their very time on this earth is taken, appropriated, and converted into wealth that they will never see, into power that they will never wield, and into privilege that they cannot touch. This is the essence of the silent contract. It operates not through negotiation, not through agreement, but through the normalization of dependency and coercion, through the masking of oppression as freedom, through the illusion that surviving in this system is a choice, when it is in fact an imposed condition. Consider the factory, the office, the field, the shop, the workshop, every site of production under capitalism. At each point, the worker is expected to submit their labor in exchange for a wage, a meager token that represents only a fraction of the value they have created. The remainder, the surplus, flows upward to the capitalist class, who have contributed little beyond ownership of the means of production. Ownership becomes authority, authority becomes power, and power becomes the extraction of wealth. The worker may ask, why is this fair? Why is this necessary? And the system responds not with reasoned argument, but with ideology. This is the natural order. You are free to choose. Work hard, and you may rise. Yet the conditions of life under capitalism ensure that for most there is no real choice. To survive is to labor is to be exploited. The terms of the contract are invisible because they are universal, because they are imposed on all who participate in society, because they are reinforced by laws, customs, education, and cultural norms that teach compliance rather than resistance. From childhood, individuals are trained to accept authority, to defer to hierarchy, to believe that labor is virtuous in itself, even when that labor enriches others while leaving them in precarity. The silent contract is not merely an economic mechanism, it is a moral and ideological instrument. The capitalist system does not simply take wealth, it shapes consciousness. It teaches workers to see their exploitation as normal, natural, and even deserved. The long hours, the fatigue, the insecurity, the fear of unemployment, the debt, the struggle to provide for oneself and one's family, all are normalized. The worker internalizes the rules of the system and comes to consent to them even without signing a contract, even without ever being asked. This is the most insidious aspect of exploitation. The worker becomes complicit in their own subjugation, not because they want to, but because they are forced to believe there is no alternative. They labor not only with their bodies, but with their minds, submitting to a system that demands their obedience while denying their agency. Every day under this contract reinforces itself, as workers compete against one another for scarce resources, for recognition, for the illusion of advancement, and in doing so they reproduce the very conditions of their own exploitation. The consequences of this silent contract are vast. Entire lives are structured around the imperatives of a system that owes them nothing. Talents are stifled. Creativity is subordinated to profit. Relationships are strained by economic pressures, and the capacity to imagine a different world is limited by the weight of survival. Yet within this oppression lies the seed of resistance. The worker, by virtue of producing all wealth, holds the potential to disrupt the system. Labour is not merely a means of survival. It is the source of society itself. The wealth that capitalism appropriates without consent can, through collective action, be reclaimed. The silent contract exists only because workers accept it, only because the structures of ideology prevent them from seeing their collective power. Once that recognition occurs, once workers see that they have never agreed to this arrangement and that the system relies entirely on their consent, the illusion fractures and the possibility of revolutionary transformation emerges. The silent contract is not an abstract concept, it is lived experience, visible in the daily exploitation of human effort, in the appropriation of value, in the unequal distribution of wealth and power. It is a mechanism of control, a means of coercion disguised as free exchange, a moral fiction designed to perpetuate hierarchy. To refuse it is to assert agency, to recognize that survival under capitalism is coerced survival, that wage labor is not a fair bargain but a system of domination, that wealth accumulated by others is wealth stolen from the laborer. It is to claim what is rightfully yours, the full value of your work, the authority over your own life, the capacity to shape society in accordance with the needs of the many rather than the greed of the few. The silent contract can be broken, but only if the workers awaken to their shared condition, organize collectively, and assert the power inherent in their labor, only if they recognize that consent was never given, and that freedom demands both refusal and action under capitalism. The worker is told they are free. From the moment of entering the labor market, society insists that individuals have choices, that opportunity exists for those who work hard, that merit determines success. These claims are repeated so often in schools, in media, in the very culture of everyday life, that they appear self-evident. Yet beneath this veil lies the harsh truth. What is presented as freedom is coercion, what is praised as competition is manipulation, and what is celebrated as merit is the reproduction of inequality. Freedom under this system is an illusion, because the conditions under which choices are made are not neutral, are not equitable, and are not determined by the worker, but by the structures of a society designed to maintain the dominance of the few. The capitalist system presents options, but these options are constrained by survival. A worker may choose between two jobs, but both are exploitative. A student may choose a course of study, but the debt, the cost, and the social pressures make the choice a coercion in disguise. The system offers the appearance of autonomy while dictating the terms of existence, ensuring that the worker consents to subjugation even as they believe they are exercising liberty. This ideological control extends to every corner of social life. Competition is lauded as a virtue, as the engine of progress, as the measure of personal worth. Children are taught from a young age to compete with classmates, to strive for grades, to outperform peers. Employees are pitted against colleagues, ranked, rated, evaluated. Society tells us that those who succeed deserve their success, and those who fail are responsible for their failure. But competition under capitalism is not a fair contest of ability or effort. It is a mechanism to divide, to isolate, and to disempower. When workers compete, they are distracted from the collective nature of labor, from the shared conditions that create wealth, and from the structural exploitation that affects them all. Meritocracy is a myth, a carefully constructed story that justifies inequality, masks the theft of surplus value, and convinces the oppressed to blame themselves rather than the system that binds them. Success is not proof of virtue, and failure is not proof of vice. Both are the result of a social structure designed to extract maximum labor while maintaining obedience, to reward compliance in ways that reinforce hierarchy while punishing dissent with invisibility or precarity. The illusion of freedom also manifests in the wage contract. The worker is ostensibly free to sell their labor, yet survival necessitates that they do so. If they refuse, if they protest, if they attempt to withdraw, they are immediately confronted by hunger, eviction, debt, or social marginalization. Freedom becomes conditional upon obedience, a freedom constrained by necessity, a freedom that exists only as long as one submits to the imperatives of the system. The capitalist, on the other hand, exercises the freedom to own, to control, to accumulate, to make decisions that shape the lives of thousands without their consent. This asymmetry is hidden behind the ideology of choice, yet it defines every interaction between labor and capital. The worker may believe they choose, but the system chooses for them because it designs the conditions under which choice occurs. The worker's agency is circumscribed by the economic and social structures that govern life, structures over which they have no control. Even culture and law are complicit in sustaining this illusion. Legal systems present contracts as voluntary, but they exist within a framework of coercion. Property laws protect ownership of the means of production, ensuring that the worker can never truly claim what they produce. Media and education glorify individual effort, obscuring the collective reality of labor and the structural inequalities that define society. Political discourse emphasizes personal responsibility, encouraging obedience and conformity while silencing critique of the system itself. Ideology teaches that oppression is acceptable, natural and just, because it masks structural coercion as freedom and social hierarchy as merit. The worker internalizes these lessons, coming to see their own exploitation as the product of personal failure rather than the product of systemic design. The consequences are profound. Workers accept limitations as choices, accept scarcity as normal, accept inequality as deserved. Solidarity is weakened, resistance is minimized, and the illusion becomes reality in the minds of the oppressed. Yet once the veil is lifted, once individuals recognize that the freedom they believed in is a coercion imposed by structural necessity, that competition is a tool of division, that meritocracy is a lie, consciousness is awakened, ideology loses its power when its claims are scrutinized, when the collective nature of labor is recognized, when the shared experience of exploitation becomes a source of unity rather than individual blame. The worker begins to see the systemic forces at play, to identify the mechanisms by which power and wealth are concentrated, and to understand that the only true freedom lies not in the choices offered within the system, but in the capacity to transform the system itself. Freedom under capitalism is a cage, and competition is the bar that divides and isolates. The worker may appear free, may be encouraged to believe they choose, but in reality they operate under compulsion, shaped by necessity, constrained by conditions they did not create and cannot individually escape. Recognition of this illusion is the first step toward emancipation. To dismantle the lie of freedom is to reveal the truth of exploitation, to understand that the system serves the few at the expense of the many, and to organize against it. Consciousness becomes power, critique becomes action, and solidarity becomes the force capable of transforming the oppressive structures that have for so long masked coercion as choice and competition as merit under the weight of capitalism. The lives of workers are defined by poverty and exhaustion. Yet these conditions are often misunderstood as personal failings rather than the inevitable consequences of systemic oppression. Society teaches that if one struggles, if one cannot achieve comfort, if one is trapped in debt, it is because of laziness, poor choices, or lack of skill. But this is a lie, deliberately constructed to divert attention from the mechanisms that perpetuate inequality. Poverty is not the result of individual inadequacy, nor is fatigue the product of moral weakness. Both are the direct outcomes of a system designed to exploit labor, concentrate wealth, and reproduce social hierarchies. The worker is compelled to sell their labor to survive, and in doing so, they are subjected to conditions that sap vitality, erode health, and limit the possibility of creative or intellectual flourishing. Exhaustion is systemic, woven into the structure of work, reinforced by hours demanded, wages suppressed, and security denied. Poverty is systemic, generated by unequal access to resources, by the appropriation of surplus value, by the unequal distribution of the fruits of labor, and by the ideological veil that convinces the oppressed to accept their condition as deserved. Consider the long hours of labor that define life for the working class. The worker rises early, commutes, endures the demands of supervisors, fulfills tasks that serve the accumulation of wealth for another, and returns home to exhaustion that leaves little room for reflection, community, or personal growth. The capitalist measures profit in efficiency and output, not in the well-being of the worker, and structures every day to maximize extraction. Fatigue is therefore not incidental. It is a tool of control. A tired, overworked worker is less likely to question authority, less able to organize, less capable of imagining alternatives to the oppressive system. Exhaustion is imposed, normalized, and justified through ideology, creating the illusion that struggle is a personal limitation rather than a social condition imposed by the structures of production and governance. Poverty functions similarly. The worker may earn a wage, yet it is always insufficient relative to the value of labor they produce. The gap between labor and reward is the surplus value appropriated by capital, the wealth stolen from those who generate it. Housing, healthcare, education, and basic sustenance are rationed according to ability to pay, forcing workers into continual cycles of labor that leave them vulnerable to economic shocks, illness, and systemic injustice. Poverty is not a random misfortune, it is a structural inevitability, a direct product of the mechanisms that privilege ownership over labor, capital over human life, and accumulation over sustenance. To suggest otherwise is to perpetuate ideology, blaming the victim rather than analyzing the system that exploits them. Even the social and cultural frameworks that accompany capitalism reinforce this oppression. Children in working-class families are taught early to accept scarcity, to defer gratification, to compete for limited opportunities, to internalize failure as personal fault. Education systems under capitalism reproduce class divisions by providing resources, knowledge, and mobility disproportionately to those who already benefit from privilege, ensuring that systemic poverty is replicated across generations. Healthcare is commodified, meaning that those most burdened by labor are least able to receive care, reinforcing exhaustion, disease, and precarity. Access to culture, leisure, and intellectual development is limited for the working class, while the elite cultivate knowledge, art, and opportunity to consolidate power. Every aspect of society conspires to make poverty and exhaustion appear natural, as though they were deserved, as though they were a reflection of individual capability rather than the outcome of a deliberately designed system of exploitation. This systemic oppression is not accidental, it is the foundation of capitalist society. By ensuring that workers are exhausted, distracted, and burdened by poverty, the ruling class maintains control, limits resistance, and reproduces hierarchy. The daily struggle for survival is itself a form of social control. It conditions the worker to tolerate injustice, to compete against fellow laborers, and to internalize blame for conditions imposed externally. Structural poverty and fatigue prevent consciousness from arising, for when survival occupies every moment, reflection and critique are suppressed. Those who control the means of production thrive precisely because the majority are consumed by meeting basic needs, leaving little energy to challenge the system. Yet within this understanding lies the potential for liberation, recognizing that poverty and exhaustion are systemic rather than personal failures allows the working class to unite, to see the shared conditions that bind them, to identify the structures that must be transformed. When individuals understand that their struggle is not a reflection of inadequacy, they can redirect their energy from self-blame to collective action. The realization that oppression is imposed rather than chosen is the foundation of revolutionary consciousness. It exposes the mechanisms by which labor is exploited, surplus value is stolen, and inequality is maintained, and it illuminates the path toward a society where the wealth produced by the many serves the many, rather than the few. Understanding structural oppression is not merely intellectual, it is mobilizing. For it identifies the enemy, clarifies the conditions of struggle, and empowers the oppressed to organize against the system that exploits them. The power of the working class is immense, for it is the source from which all wealth, all material abundance, and all social productivity flows. The worker does not merely participate in society, the worker creates society. Every building that rises, every field that yields, every factory that hums with machinery, every product changed in the market, every service rendered, all are the result of human labor. Yet, under capitalism, this labor is appropriated, its value expropriated, and its power obscured. The working class is taught to see itself as powerless, divided, and dependent on those who own the means of production, yet the truth is unmistakable. Without labor, the system collapses. The capitalists can hold title and command authority, but they cannot generate wealth themselves. They are parasites upon the body of labor. The strength of the working class lies not in their individual efforts, but in their collective capacity to produce, to organize, and to assert control over the very structures that sustain society. When workers unite in understanding and action, they hold the power to reshape society, to redirect the flow of wealth, and to determine the conditions under which life is lived. This power is inherent because labor is the foundation of existence under capitalism. Capital, machines, land, and resources are valuable only because labor transforms them into products, goods, and services that society consumes. The worker, through effort, skill, and cooperation, converts potential into reality. The laborer is both creator and sustainer of the material world, and yet capitalism convinces the worker to defer recognition of this fact. Wages are framed as compensation, yet they are only a fraction of the value created. While the remainder of the surplus value flows to owners who contributed little to production beyond possession of titles and rights enforced by law. This appropriation of value is the very mechanism of oppression, and the recognition of the labourer's role is the key to liberation. The moment the working class acknowledges that it is the source of wealth, the moment it understands that without its collective effort society could not function, the illusion of capitalist omnipotence dissolves. Power rests where labour resides, and the working class possesses that power collectively, whether it recognizes it or not. Collective labour is not merely a physical force, it is social and transformative. When workers unite, organize, and coordinate their efforts, they become capable of shaping not only production but also society itself. History is filled with moments when labour asserted its strength, when solidarity overcame division, when the collective capacity of the many challenged the authority of the few. Strikes, uprisings, and revolutions have all demonstrated that when workers withhold labour or redirect it according to their own interests, the balance of power shifts dramatically. Capital is immobilized without labour. Wealth cannot circulate. The structures that uphold oppression falter. The power of labour is therefore both economic and political, a dual force capable of challenging systemic inequality and creating new possibilities for social organization. The working class is not passive, it is the agent of history, the mover of material and social transformation. Yet this power is effective only when it is conscious and organized. Capitalism thrives on division, on competition, on the alienation of laborers from one another and from the products of their work. The system fosters mistrust, isolation, and individualism, making it difficult for workers to recognize their shared interests. Ideology obscures the collective nature of labor, presenting inequality as natural and exploitation as the result of personal failure. The worker may feel powerless because they see only their own struggle, their own fatigue, their own lack of opportunity, but the moment labourers perceive themselves as part of a larger, interdependent body of production, the structures of exploitation lose their grip. Collective labour becomes not only a source of wealth but a weapon, capable of challenging authority, reclaiming surplus value, and reorganizing society to to serve the needs of the many rather than the profits of the few. This transformative power extends beyond material production. When the working class recognizes its collective capacity, it can reshape politics, education, culture, and social relations. Labor is not confined to factories or fields. It permeates every aspect of human life, and its collective organization can reorient society toward justice, equity, and shared prosperity. Social wealth is not merely economic. It is relational, intellectual, and moral. By harnessing the power of collective labor, the working class can ensure that the fruits of human effort benefit the collective rather than an elite minority. Solidarity amplifies labor as strength. Consciousness directs it toward purpose, and organization transforms potential into reality. The capitalist class fears this understanding, which is why it invests in ideology, coercion, and fragmentation, seeking to prevent the working class from discovering the true power it already possesses. Recognizing that labor is the source of social wealth is the first step to reclaiming that wealth. The working class need not ask for permission, need not beg for reform, and need not appeal to the morality of those who profit from their toil. Their power exists objectively in the material foundation of society. It becomes effective subjectively when consciousness, unity, and collective action converge. The organization of labor, the assertion of collective will, and the redirection of productivity toward shared benefit are revolutionary acts. The working class, once aware of its inherent power, can dismantle systems of exploitation, redistribute wealth, and build a society in which labor serves life rather than profit, in which social wealth is a common inheritance rather than a privilege hoarded by a few. The call to revolution is not a call to chaos, nor is it a vague appeal to hope. It is a precise, urgent, and practical necessity for the liberation of the working class. The structures of capitalism, which have long profited from the labor of the many, cannot be reformed into justice by appeals to morality or by incremental concession. Exploitation is not an accident, inequality is not a mistake, and oppression is not a flaw in the system. They are the system itself. The only force capable of dismantling these structures is the organized, conscious, and united action of those whose labor sustains society. Revolution is the conscious refusal to continue under conditions that were never agreed to. The collective assertion that the wealth produced by the many belongs to the many, and the deliberate construction of social arrangements that prioritize human needs over private profit. Unity is the foundation of this power, for division is the instrument of oppression. When workers are pitted against one another, when mistrust, competition, or ideology prevents solidarity, the system thrives. But when laborers recognize their common conditions, align their interests, and act collectively, they become an unstoppable force, capable of reshaping society from the ground up. Organization transforms potential into action. The power of the working class exists inherently in labor itself, but without coordination, it remains latent, diffuse, and ineffective. Dispersed, isolated workers can be exhausted, misled, and manipulated. Organized, they can halt production, seize control of resources, demand accountability, and implement alternative systems of distribution and governance. Historical movements demonstrate this truth. Where workers have united in strikes, unions, councils, or revolutionary committees, they have forced concessions, toppled regimes, and created new social arrangements. Organization allows the conscious direction of labor toward collective ends, ensuring that the force of many is not wasted, that their struggle is coherent, and that their demands are articulated clearly and powerfully. Without structure, action is sporadic and vulnerable. With organization, action is deliberate, sustained, and transformative. Conscious action is inseparable from unity and organization. Revolution is not simply a response to suffering, nor is it a spontaneous eruption of anger. It is the product of critical awareness. Workers must understand the mechanisms that bind them, the systemic exploitation that extracts their labor, the ideological forces that mask oppression, and the ways in which division and competition weaken their power. Consciousness illuminates the reality that poverty, fatigue, and inequality are not the result of individual failure but of structural design. It clarifies the purpose of collective struggle, directs the energy of the oppressed toward tangible objectives, and ensures that actions undertaken are revolutionary rather than merely reactive. Conscious action is informed, deliberate, and principled, distinguishing movements of liberation from futile or misdirected rebellion. Without awareness, labor may strike but cannot transform. Without understanding, the oppressed may resist but remain constrained within the logic of the system they seek to overthrow. Unity, organization, and consciousness are mutually reinforcing. As workers recognize their shared conditions, solidarity grows. As solidarity grows, the need for organized structures becomes evident. As organization develops, collective consciousness deepens. This triad forms the foundation of revolutionary power. The capitalist class fears this realization, understanding that their dominance is predicated on division, ignorance, and passivity. Every attempt to fracture solidarity, to mislead through ideology, to suppress knowledge, is a recognition of the threat that united labor represents. The moment the working class acts in unity with conscious purpose and organized strategy, the existing order is challenged not by rhetoric but by material force. Labor, which has been commodified and alienated, is reclaimed as a weapon of social transformation. The call to revolution is also a call to courage. It requires refusing to accept exploitation as natural, denying that scarcity or hierarchy is inevitable, and rejecting the ideology that conditions obedience. It demands persistence in the face of intimidation, resilience in the face of repression, and creativity in envisioning alternative social arrangements. Revolution is not an abstract ideal, it is concrete, practical, and deeply rooted in the material reality of the oppressed. The tools are already in the hands of the working class, the capacity to produce, to organize, to communicate, and to enforce collective decisions. The authority of the few exists only because the many consent, whether through fear, habit, or ignorance. Remove that consent through unity, channel that power through organization, and direct it with conscious purpose, and the structures of exploitation cannot withstand the force of the people who sustain them. To reclaim society is to assert control of the means of production, over wealth, over labor itself, and over the social arrangements that determine life and opportunity. It is to ensure that the fruits of labor are shared equitably, that decisions about work, resources, and governance are collective, and that the systems that once oppressed the many now serve the needs of the collective. The revolution called for is not merely a seizure of power, but a transformation of society itself, a remaking of human relations, and the creation of conditions where labor, life, and human potential are aligned with justice, equality, and freedom. Unity provides the strength, organization provides the structure, and conscious action provides the direction to dismantle exploitation, reclaim social wealth, and construct a world in which the working class recognizes and wields the power that has always been theirs comrades. The time for illusions has passed. The silent contract that demanded your labor without consent has been exposed. The promises of freedom and merit have been revealed as deception. The poverty and exhaustion you endure have been shown to be systemic, and the wealth you create has always belonged to you, even when others claimed it. The path forward is clear. Recognize your power, unite in solidarity, organize with precision, and act with consciousness. The revolution is not a distant dream. It is an imperative of history. The system exists only because you permit it. Its authority is sustained only by your acquiescence. Reclaim your labor, reclaim your wealth, reclaim your dignity, and in doing so, transform society itself. The future is not written by those who exploit, but by those who produce, by those who organize, and by those who refuse to accept oppression any longer. Stand together, act decisively, and let the world witness the power of a united working class, for the emancipation of humanity depends upon it.